back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are positively into training camp. All of our training camp coverage, of course, brought to you by our friends at Coons Ford Security Boulevard. Dennis will be around later on in the week. I am not cruising around in the blue Bronco. It sounds like a great loss, but people were staring at me, Luke, up and down Route 50. I have videos, people peering in, seeing the stuff, the mess that I made in Dennis's vehicle last week. But our friends at Wise have also put us on the road. I stopped in 3 different Wise markets in Southern Maryland, in various places like Lusby and Solomon's Island and places Lexington Park that I had never been over the weekend. And Luke has only been to one park, 2 parks, the Oriole Park and, of course, the Owings Mills Park, where the Ravens are parked and practicing. What's going on, brother? You staying hydrated out there? I'm getting a lot of iodine and a lot of salt in my diet all of a sudden. So I'm trying to eat as many vegetables and flush is what I'm trying to do.
It's been good. The weather's been really nice overall. I mean, I've been doing training camp. My first one was 2009 out at McDaniel College in Westminster. Feels like an eternity ago. But this time of year, you're talking late July and early August.
Was that the year I gave you the black shirt to wear, or the second time I gave you the black shirt to wear?
I can't remember. It's been so long. but you're used to 95 and humid and sweltering. It's been quite pleasant. It's helped that they've been practicing at 8:30 in the morning, and I think that's deliberate. Kind of an old school schedule from the standpoint of when you think back to two-a-days, they would have 8:30, 8:45 in the morning, and then they'd have their special teams practice at 2. Well, they don't have two-a-days anymore, but they're still getting the bulk of their on-field work in early, and that makes sense. There's no reason to treat this like it's Bear Bryant with the Junction Boys and Texas A&M way back when, where ESPN's making a bad movie about it. So, but we're now into about 2 weeks into camp, counting down now for the first preseason game. Interested to see what the preseason looks like, because we're only talking about 3 games as opposed to 4. Certainly not expecting to see the starters a ton against New Orleans on Saturday, but I always talk about the checkpoints over the course of the offseason, the spring, the summer. We talk about the draft, OTAs, minicamp. Now we're roughly 2 weeks into training camp. The pads have come on. You have your camp injuries here and there. We'll get into that. Lamar Jackson's back on the field now, but that first preseason game, I think it gives you a little more context as far as, all right, the young guys on the roster who have looked good, the position battles on the roster where you're kind of saying, okay, this guy's been running with the 1s a little bit more. This guy's kind of mixing in a little bit. This guy's with the 2s. That preseason game and those snaps, the way they're distributed, who plays a whole lot, who plays a little bit, but then gets pulled, and you kind of say, they might like that guy a little bit more. You get tells. You don't want to read too much into it because, again, we're not privy to the exact details of the plan. And there are a lot of politics that go into it in terms of draft pick versus a priority signing, a free agent signing, a veteran player with 1 year left on his deal, rookie with 1 year left on his rookie contract, or that guy that was on the practice squad a year ago that developed and you like him and you got a few more years of team control. So all of those factors play into it, not just who's making the catches, who's making the tackles, who's getting burned in coverage, who's making the big plays, who's getting flagged. So I always, as much as I make fun of fake football, and that's part of my shtick in talking about the preseason games, for those younger guys, for those bubble players on the roster, you start to get a little more context. Something I love to keep track of, to kind of pull back the curtain on how I try to evaluate, fully acknowledging I'm not a scout, but you pay attention who's on the first kickoff team. You pay attention who's on the first punt team. And that's not to say those 11 guys are going to make it, whoever kicks off against the Saints on Saturday night. But if you see a couple younger guys in the mix there, you might say, that might be a way for that player to make the roster over someone else at their position group. So they're just those little things that you're looking to. It's not fascinating. It's not something we're going to remember weeks from now even, let alone months from now and into the regular season. But if you're trying to figure out who those 10, 12, 14, 16, however you want to label a quote bubble player, you kind of get a better grasp on just where they stand by how they're used and how the coaches are kind of inserting them into the action on Saturday night.
I look at these as sort of a skating period to 18 games, right? This 17 game thing, it's wacky. I don't think it'll hold 4 years. I mean, literally. So watching this transition of football where preseason games, I remember coaches, Marvin, Rex, Brian, those guys, they really found value in them. Then they started to devalue them. Then the coaches started to devalue them and not play anybody. Then nobody wanted to play. Then they play patty cake. Then they march a bunch of like guys who have no chance of making the team out there in the fourth game. I mean, they've mussed all this up to the point where it's unrecognizable to me for evaluation purposes for my eyes, for what I'm trying to do to say these 3 games or where the weight would be. I don't even know. I think they get as much out of these practice sessions where they run down to Carolina and do as they in regard to picking football players as they do as to what happens with 10 minutes left to go in the third quarter. I mean, if you've watched Hard Knocks over 20 years and by the way, while we're on training camp stories, you're talking about two-a-days and stuff. The other day, the death of Corey Stringer came up as a 20th anniversary. And I remember where I was that day. I was in New York City at Bryant Park. I was getting paid handily by HBO to host a Hard Knocks kickoff for the entire brand and series. And on that day, when I'm in the park, pimping football and all that, we lost Corey Stringer. And, of course, his relationship with Brian, all that. So all of that nonsense that went on with football, with water coolers and crushing the players and all of that, especially guys you already knew. Corey Stringer was going to make the team. Starters make the team, to your point. How all of this gets evaluated is so much different, and I don't think it has a whole lot to do with the games themselves, to your point, especially with the way the games are played and the way we've seen them devolve over the last 15 years. I am fascinated to see with 3 games how that gets played differently than 4. There used to be that routine, right? Game 1, starter would play a minute. Then 10 years ago, 50, that stopped, right? And then it was the always important 2, but the third one was like the real game, and they would play like 2 quarters and maybe even put the pads on after halftime. I don't know what this is, right? I haven't figured that out. And again, it's preseason football. I've had too many Bobby Rainey's in my day to worry much about it, other than who's going to be on the field in Vegas in 4 weeks now, right? More than 4 weeks.
Sure. But as I was kind of saying, I think not so much how they perform in the game. I think it lends itself to some clues about how the coaching staff is thinking about these guys. I think you just said it. And the joint practices in Carolina is a great example. And, if you've heard coaches over the last few years talk about it, John Harbaugh or even coaches around the league, I mean, the Ravens have actually had players poached from the Rams actually have looked at, when the Ravens practiced against them a few years ago, actually took a corner. I mean, Darius, I can't remember his last name. I'm drawing a total blank. Anyway, my point is you get those up
never forget Kerry Vedvik
looks. Right. Well, yeah, sure. But with these joint practices, I mean, the Ravens got a chance to see Calais Campbell up close and personal when Jacksonville came to Owings Mills and practiced against the Ravens. Now, Calais Campbell's a great player, but you get to see him in a different setting, a practice setting where how does he interact with his teammates? Is this guy a truly a veteran leader? Is he a guy that's kind of out for himself, as some players can be?
You get to see his value, is what I would say, more than the player.
Right. Yeah, so you have some of that, but you're right in the sense of the practices themselves, the joint practices that we've seen become in vogue, which, it's funny how these things are cyclical. I mean, teams practiced against one another, and you've heard of joint practices a long time ago, and then that was something that went away for quite a while, and that's something that's come back specifically with the Ravens. They've done it, for the better part of 7 or 8 years now, with a few years, last year being one of them for obvious reasons, where they haven't done it. But for the most part, they've had at least one set of joint practices per summer if they can. And they've had 2 on a couple of occasions, if you remember. So it gives you that competitive setting that's in a much more controlled environment. And that's where coaches like it. I mean, I noted this on my 12 Ravens thoughts at BaltimorePositive.com, which I've been doing every day of training camp. It's nice and quick, 50 words or less for each of the 12 thoughts, give you observations, give you a couple factoids, some guys that are absent. So encourage everyone to check that out. But on Saturday, the Ravens did a live tackling period at the very end of practice for the young guys. This certainly wasn't Calais Campbell or Lamar Jackson or any of the veterans or, even some of the key rookies, even some of the key second-year players I did not see involved there. But my point in saying that is they do so little live to the ground tackling at this point in time. It is minimal when they do that. In fact, when they go to Carolina next week, I'm guessing you'll see the same thing. You'll see those young guys, those unproven guys, they'll do some scrimmaging there. I'm guessing the vets, it will be thud. They'll go live until you wrap up the ball carrier and you stop. The whole point's to kind of stay off the ground, because you go to the ground, that's when you get ankle sprains and torn ACLs and things of that nature. So it is really interesting to see how the preseason's evolved. I think it'll be fascinating to see not just the Ravens, but how the whole league kind of uses this new 3-game schedule, not counting the Steelers and the Cowboys playing that thrilling Hall of Fame game last week, which I watched about 2 minutes of. But it'll be interesting, because even the Ravens, even John Harbaugh, it's evolved in how he's used the preseason. You've seen it over the last couple of years where they would get most of their work in game 1 and 2. The starters would play roughly 15 to 20 snaps. Some guys a little more, some guys a little less. Some of the key vets don't play at all in that first game, but they'll play in the second one. But it's a much more controlled, let's get 2 or 3 series in here and then get you out. And we've even seen that, we used to call it that all important third preseason game, like you mentioned. The last few years, again, last year throwing that out because there was no preseason, the starters weren't even playing in the third preseason game. I can recall going to Philadelphia 2 years ago for Ravens Eagles third preseason game. In fact, my sister, who, as you know, is a huge Ravens fan, and her husband, my brother-in-law, is a huge Eagles fan. They were really excited that we rode out there together, and Lamar Jackson and Carson Wentz were not playing. So, it kind of, really took the air out of it. So taking away that fourth preseason game, does that make the other 3 games have a little more value? Maybe. And look, the Ravens do it. All these teams do it a little bit differently. I mean, some teams will play their starters more so in the first game. Some won't play their starters at all in the first game. So it'll be interesting.
Well, it's interesting because it's a formula, and amongst the coaches, you want like players on the field. You don't want first and third team out there ever, right? And you don't really love first and second team out there much. You're willing to deal with it through 4 or 5 preseason games, as there used to be, or 6 to 8 back when I was a kid. But in the modern era, what they're trying to evaluate during the games, sometimes I'm at a loss. I mean, really, over the course of years, it has lost me, and it's lost Jerry Sandusky on the call, for crying out loud, that these games have become very exhibition in their own right. And strangely, the evaluative part of it feels like minds were always made up before these guys get on the field. We'll sit here and talk about the edges of the roster in week 3 or 4. I just don't know what the what the flow of that's going to feel like. And to your point, they haven't even touched each other yet, right? We're already into the second week of August. It's a different time and place in the way all the practices are done, right? And the sports science part of this has to play a part in that.
Well, it really does. I mean, and they've started hitting. I mean, they put on the pads last Tuesday, I guess it was, and they had padded practices Tuesday and Wednesday. They had padded practices then for Friday and Saturday. So they've hit some, but as I said, it's a much more controlled environment. You see so little. Even going back to when I started covering training camps in 2009, 2010, it wasn't that long ago. I mean, that was the first few years of the Harbaugh era, and they did way more live then. Now it's the offensive and defensive line, they mix it up.
Don Martindale can really talk to that, right? I mean, he's been around a long time to see the differences in the way they used to evaluate versus the way they evaluate now.
Well, and I think with, and I've even seen, it's funny, I just Googled thud tackling for football. I mean, and thud is a term that lots of people understand. I mean, we use that term when I played high school football 20 years ago. Thud tackling meant you played live until you get to the ball carrier, you hit, you wrap, and then you stop. You don't take them to the down or to the ground. You don't try to kill shot or anything like that. But there's even been some studies that, when you do that, it forces you to use proper technique to, sink, wrap, and, tackle properly, which, it sounds a little intuitive to say, well, we're not practicing tackling and during practices. How's that going to translate to the games? And I think there's some fair points to be made there as well. And we've seen that. And many of us have lament tackling not being as sharp as it once was, although I think there's some recency bias that always comes into play there as well. But it is a totally different game. And you're so much of this. We've talked about the attrition. You mentioned the 17-game schedule. So you're adding another week. At some point, I don't know if it's going to be 3 or 4 years. It might be the next CBA, which is about a decade from now. But that 18th game will be coming. We know it's just a matter of time. They've gotten this, there was so much fight about 16. Now it's 17.
17's a prime number. Nobody's going to you like that number.
Yeah, you're not going to put that toothpaste back in the tube. It's going to go to 18 at some point, whether it's 2027 or 2031. It'll be there. So
they've been playing college football for 100 years without preseason games. So it is possible.
Right. And I mean, and that's, you'll even hear coaches say that. I mean, this idea when we think about the preseason schedule, it used to be 6 games, and you think about what the culture was then. Guys came to camp to get in shape. Well, now you come to camp out of shape, they're not putting you on the field. We've seen that with the conditioning test and all that. So, I mean, it really, we know it's become a year-round sport in terms of the training and the physical preparation. And I mean, the coaches always want more time. We know that. The players union always wants less time on the field, but they're much more particular and specific in what they're trying to see when they're out there. They don't have 2-a-days anymore. So, the preseason games, there's plenty of evaluation going on, but it's much more focused. It's not on, let's go out and beat the New Orleans Saints. Now, those second and third team guys that end up playing in the second half, and we've talked about specifically the depth they've had on the defensive side of the ball. If you actually remember how these preseason games have played out, the Ravens are really good at winning preseason games. Go back and look over the last 5 years. I think a lot of it is because they've had very good defensive depth, and even guys that don't make the roster that are part of their quote third team defense are probably better than a lot of teams' second team defensive guys. And it's kind of played out that way. But, in the big picture, is that terribly consequential to your season? Well, you want to have good defensive depth. But as I said, when you're watching those preseason games, you're looking for something specific. I mean, if Greg Roman's he's not putting together a game plan for a preseason game. You're going to look at certain things. You're going to look at certain positions where you have a battle. They're going to take a long look at Ben Cleveland at left guard, who's trending in the right direction to be the starter week 1. But that doesn't mean Ben Powers or Tyree Phillips doesn't have a chance to beat him out still at this point. They're going to look at
You've been tough on the tight ends, man. I've been reading your comments.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, fine. There was a lot of excitement about getting Josh Oliver from Jacksonville, former 3rd-round pick. And hey, for a 7th-round conditional draft pick, it was a great trade. But that doesn't mean that he's going to be a real player here. He's flashed. Eli Wolf has flashed, but I've seen plenty of tight ends over the last 10 years that were trying to make the roster as a number 3 guy. I can't say that they've stood out in the way that Darren Waller would flash, for example, in the way that, I don't know, Crockett Gilmore before he had all of his injuries catch up to him, the way he would flash, So, but that said, if reporters see in an extensive setting where they're tackling, it's full live, it's a live game type setting, it's only part of it. And the practices certainly play a big part. And it's one thing I've always kind of laughed about with the 4th preseason game, and I've been guilty of it too over the years, as you're less experienced watching it. But we always think about all these jobs up for grabs in that final preseason game because it's all the young guys playing, right? In reality, maybe there's 1 or 2 spots that haven't been decided at that point. Everything else has been decided at that point. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out, with things being a little different this year, and keep in mind, everything was so COVID-centric in how we looked at training camp last year for obvious reasons, and there was no preseason, and the roster, all that was different in how we viewed that. But next Tuesday, they cut from 90 to 85. Then after the Carolina game, which is a second preseason game, they cut from 85 to 80. And then after the Washington game, which is now the third and final preseason game, they'll cut to 53 on the 31st of the month. So, in recent years, it had kind of been 90 and then going to 53, or some years it's been 90 to 75 or something, 70, something like that. They've had different checkpoints, but we'll see it start to trim starting next week. Probably not going to be any surprises at that point, but by the time they get to that final preseason game, that Washington game on the 28th, maybe there's one or two spots up for grabs. It's to your point, they're evaluating every single day, and I would venture to guess he would never tell you this on the record if you asked it at a press conference. I would venture to guess if you asked John Harbaugh, Eric DeCosta, Wink Martindale, and Greg Roman, and throw Ozzie Newsome in there as well, and some of the other movers and shakers in the front office, to name you their 53-man roster right now, they could probably get you to 49, I bet, at this point, and feel pretty good about it. I mean, that's just how this works. I think they know pretty quickly, but especially an analytics-minded organization like the Ravens, what do you want? You want data, and you want information and evaluation. They're, even though they're not necessarily keeping.
Well, you want to be sure you got the right 49, right? I mean, this is what this period's for. It's to reinforce what you think you already knew, and along the way, a Michael Pierce is going to get fat. A Chuck Carr is going to flash, right, and become that guy. Along the way, you're going to find gold, but that's what Ozzie would say, the process, right? This is part of that process,
right? I mean, I've been working on it. You can check it out at BaltimorePositive.com. My latest kind of look at the roster. I'm not picking my 53 just yet. My first projected 53-man roster will be right after the New Orleans game. But at this point, I look at it and say there might be 20 guys that might be on the bubble. Some guys are, it's kind of just goes down to, okay, do they keep only one backup? Is it Trace McSorley or Tyler Huntley? One of those guys is going to be on the roster, and it might be both of them. So there's some of those that are more bubble, they're just roster spots that haven't been filled yet. But I might say that there might be, 20 guys that I think might have a chance to make the roster. They'd laugh at me and say, yeah, you can shave half of those guys off your list, but they're not telling me who those guys are. And I'm not Eric DeCosta or John Harbaugh trying to evaluate. So, I'm looking at it with my, more discerning than someone who can't go out to training camp and watch every day, but there's still going to be things that we miss. And, I think what's fascinating sometimes, and going back to the whole preseason thing, sometimes you'll get a tell in that final preseason games, a guy, and I'll use a perfect recent example, Willie Henry, someone who came into training camp 3 years ago, as a guy who was lining up as the starting three technique at the beginning of training camp with the starting defense on the defensive line. And then we saw him in that final preseason game at Washington playing in the fourth quarter. Well, he got cut the next day, and it was kind of eye-opening to say, wow, that's one that I don't think even the coaches anticipated 3 or 4 weeks ago, but he didn't play very well. And there were other guys that they liked better. So, and now you've seen Willie Henry be with, I think, 6-7 different teams now and hasn't stuck anywhere, despite the fact he was a 4th-round pick 4 or 5 years ago. So, you always have that. And then you have a Michael Pierce who was a rookie free agent and had gained a little steam and then dominated in the final preseason game and locked up his roster spot. So you'll have a little bit of that, but there really is so much evaluation that goes on that even these games, I think there's a very focused set of objectives that they're trying to accomplish. It might be something that has to do with a certain, they want to look at their 12 personnel package on offense, or they want to really look at their dime on defense. They're not playing in terms of how do we beat the New Orleans Saints. They're not, they don't care who's out on the field for them. And you said it, ideally you want starters against starters, but I can remember them playing the Rams a couple years ago where the Ravens did play most of their starters, or at least a good number of their starters. Rams didn't play any of their starters. So in that case, yeah, you do get first, second team. And that's where I said, yeah, they're going to look better than those guys, but they're going to look at, a certain package that they want to look at. Not that they're going to use a trick play, but they want to look at how their blocking tight end looks, or how their candidates at the nickel corner position behind Tavon Young look. So there's a lot of that. And, we're still early in that process. But again, I think these guys, 2 weeks in, I think most coaches to a man would tell you that roster picture is crystallizing a little more quickly than us outsiders would think at this point.
Luke, the crab cake tour over the weekend in Southern Maryland was not much more successful than, let's say, The Orioles were this weekend. But I will say we were coming northbound off of 2 and coming out of like Deal, Maryland. And we had to use the restroom. We were tired and hot. And there it was. The Royal Farms, that's the southernmost. There were no Royal Farms down in the tip down in southern Maryland. We had to work our way back up toward Annapolis, got some fried chicken. It is Chicken Palooza month. All of Luke's training camp reports sponsored by our friends at Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast. Chicken Palooza still alive for a couple more weeks. And I do like when I wear the Chicken Palooza shirt and I walk into Royal Farms, the people in there wearing the Royal Farms shirts look at me, they're like, hey, how'd you get a shirt? But I know people at Royal Farms, so I appreciate that. Luke, I know it's not lost on you, but beer and wine is available at Royal Farms in like Berlin, Ocean City. So I took a picture there. I'm headed back that way next week. So from one coast to the other, I'm heading back east and then west later in the month. Luke is headed back to Owings Mills. We're going to have more football. We're getting you ready for preseason games and the Saints and learning what thud means and not scud. And let's see, what else are we doing? Oh, the hashtag is Crab Cake Tour. If you want to follow the Maryland Crab Cake Tour, I've been running around having gastronomic treats. They're all trying to make me eat the potatoes, dude. They all want, here, have some French fries. Here, have some potato chips. It's not good, Luke. You know that. You know how I eat, man. It's not good for me.
Well, you got to man up, though, right? You made the commitment, and you're going to see it through. And I've seen you've mixed a couple salads in. I've seen that. I've been following your social on there. I've seen a couple salads,
green beans,
pictures,
a lot of green beans.
Yes.
Whenever offered, I'll take the green beans. Sure, yes.
So there you go. And the crab cakes. You got the tough choices between broiled and fried, and so hey. Living the dream, right?
I didn't have a great crab cake over the weekend. I'll be honest with you. I mean, I went to a bunch. I'm not bagging on Southern Maryland, but here's something I learned, and I'm going to tell Don Moeller this in the recon this week. I think Bill Cole's coming on. A lot of our friends. And I found gold watermelon last week, so I'm happy. We found fresh corn. We got peaches. We're all good. We're good on all of that. But the thing I learned is if tartar sauce is on the tray and it's the only condiment on the tray, I'm going to be skeptical. And I don't even mean like it's that I know anything. I'm just saying you put tartar on a fish stick. You don't put it on. It's like dumping ketchup on a steak. It's like putting A1 on a good steak. I mean, like for me, I don't know. Are you a cocktail sauce guy? I've seen you eat a million crab cakes, right? You're just plain, right?
Plain. I'm plain. I'll do it on a roll or I'll throw some crackers in there. I'll mix it up in that regard, but no, I don't need to put anything on it. I mean, to me, if it's truly a great crab cake, it kind of stands alone in that way. So, and then, that's, hey, more power to you. But, to me, you'll hear some people that are, I don't know if you'd call anyone who talking about pizza being a foodie, but you've heard some people say that the mark of a great pizza is not putting all that stuff on it. And do you really like it that way? So,
okay. And I will go with that. Okay. And
I like toppings, so I'm not, but I've heard people say that before.
My premise on all of this was every single crab cake would be different. And I'll be honest, man, the first couple of days I went down to the beach, those first crab cakes I had were like unbelievably good. And then I came home and then I went south. I had a decent crab cake at the Crab Cake Cafe. I mean, really good Maryland crab cake. They offered these weird things. And then I went south and, maybe I went to the wrong, I don't think I went to the wrong places. It just wasn't as good, period. I don't know what else to say. I don't want to be like blasphemous. It's Maryland crab. It's fine. It's what you do with it. And I'm learning there are slurries and techniques. And like I told Dennis this the other day, I had a crab cake that was broiled on top, but the plate was so searing that it was almost fried on the bottom. So it was like a party on top and business on bottom, as Dennis said. So there were things I'm learning things about crab cakes that I didn't think I would know. I'm learning things about the state. We drove all around the southern tip, beautiful marshland, parks, boats, water in, people, beautiful homes, manicured lawns. history, St. Mary's, just so it's been wonderful. And I know you've been out chasing football. I want to let you know I'm coming back to the football thing at the end of the month, man. It's just fake football. I got real crab cakes. Fake football, right? I mean, think about it. Weigh that, Luke, right?
Fair enough. I can't fault you on that. I'll take care of trying to figure out who the 8th and 9th offensive linemen are going to be, and who's going to be the how are they going to keep 6 or 7 corners as opposed to 9?
Listen, when I was white knuckling one lane in the Coons Bronco, coming up the Bay Bridge, and I'm moving around a little bit, and I'm keeping my there was a lot of pressure on me. I felt like Joe Flacco trying to get a job in Philadelphia or something. That's a good picture, wasn't it, though? It's a good picture.
It was great. I actually heard from someone who was out in Eagles camp who said Joe's had a nice camp. Clearly they want Jalen Hurts to be the guy there. They're hoping for him to be the guy there. But I heard it was one of the reporters I think for The Athletic, who's his last name's escaping me, but he said Joe Flacco actually looked pretty good out there, and it's wild. I would not have thought Joe would hang on just to become this backup for a few years. But as I joked to someone like, hey, the money he's making right now is he can now give his grandkid a beach house one day or something like that. So, hey, I say this all the time, play as long as you can. And seeing Peyton Manning give his Hall of Fame speech over the weekend, and as much as I
didn't see the speech. So
I saw some clips of it, but I know social was going crazy about it, and I will watch it because it's funny. I saw Monday Morning Quarterback, their Twitter, the Sports Illustrated MMQB, their Twitter tweeted out the moment that Peyton Manning became the GOAT. And it was the clip of him with the United Way skit when he hosted SNL, when he hit the kid in the back of the head with the football, where everyone suddenly saw this side. Because I was not a big Peyton Manning guy early in his career whatsoever. He was an Indianapolis Colt. Why would I be? But him revealing his personality at that point completely changed how I felt about the guy. So he talked so eloquently about football, where you had people saying this guy needs to be commissioner one day. So, but my point is, and bringing it back to Joe Flacco, I can recall people talking in not so flattering terms about how Peyton Manning looked his last year or two playing quarterback. And look, he was a shell of himself. We know that.
And still rode at it on an orange horse.
He did. Thanks in large part to that defense. But I've said it, and this is where maybe I've become older, and now these guys that are hanging on are about my age now. I'll be 38 in October, and not that I've ever, I was barely an athlete in high school, but you gain an appreciation for these guys when you've seen them be great for so long, and their body is really starting to fail them in an athletic sense, and they're holding on. And Joe Flacco is not a starting caliber NFL quarterback at this point. I think that's pretty clear, but he's playing and he's still making money and he still likes doing it. And now he's getting to play for basically his hometown team. God bless him. Good for him. That's awesome. I let these guys play as long as they want to. I hope that they don't make unwise choices in terms of how it affects their long-term health. And certainly you talk about offensive linemen and defensive linemen and guys that are banging heads, but quarterbacks for the most part are a little bit of a different breed in that way, especially if you played in the 21st century. They protect you a lot more, but play as long as you can. So it's kind of cool to see that. And you said it, that picture of him, I don't know which of his sons that was, but throwing the shoulder pads and the Eagles, he's wearing Jaw's old number 7 in Philadelphia, throwing that on his kid, one of his boys. That was cool to see. So, you see those moments, and that's one thing that's been nice with a little bit more of a relaxed setting out at training camp. Now seeing these guys with their kids coming out to the field after practice is over and whatnot. And, it was hilarious. One of the first days of camp, Jimmy Smith took off. He was not in on the play, but he was kind of standing on the sideline, and he suddenly just kind of takes off. Well, one of his sons had gotten loose from his mother and had kind of wandered not too far. It wasn't like wasn't an immensely dangerous situation, but Jimmy actually went and gathered him and took him back to his mom. It was one of the funniest things I've seen at camp before. Probably speaks to Jimmy not being as engaged as some of the young guys during a training camp practice. But you see those kind of things. Marcus Peters gave his cleats away to some young fans. I mean, they're not allowed to sign autographs. They're keeping distance for obvious reasons with the pandemic and the protocols, but gave his cleats and his gloves away to a couple young fans who were at practice one of the first days. Those are the things we really missed last year. And to see those kind of things, and no, it's not Westminster, and no, it's not even a normal setting where they're signing for hundreds of fans, but it's still been cool to see those interactions, and it just kind of reminds you why we all love it, right? I mean, it's it's football. I think back to growing up as a kid without a team here in town, and now you look at what this legacy has become for over a quarter century now, and it's pretty special. It really is. So it's something that I see those scenes, and us reporters can be grumpy or cynical sometimes, and I can be that way at times. I know that, but you see some of those scenes like that with some fan interaction and stuff, and you just remind yourself of how much you love this, and how much that element was missing last year, as far as not having fans out there at all. So fingers crossed that things stay okay, and that's allowed to continue in 2021. But it's been a fun start to camp in that way, and now we're getting into I guess we're the dog days of camp where they're tired of hitting each other, and they'll get a chance to do a little bit of that this weekend against New Orleans.
I must say that when the crab cake tour was down at Solomon's Island, I stopped at a Wise Market. We went to get some coconut water on sale with the Wise Rewards card, C20 $239, by the way. There, buy it. So I went to walk in. There was like a place next door with an American beer sign, and it said "Hail," and it had the former logo of the other team. And my wife, being snark queen that she is, says, "Hail what? They don't even have a nickname. They don't have a team name. Hail what?" And I thought, yeah, it's football season. So there, that's good, right?
Well, they should just go the route of the Cleveland Indians / Cleveland Guardians and just become the Washington Pigskins, right? All they got to do is just scratch out the first part of the name, and as some people pointed out, the Guardians, Indians, Guardians, the spelling of the second half of the word is the same. So just do something like that, and you can rebrand,
and they could be the Hogs.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. I don't think they're doing that, but
I don't know what Dan Snyder's doing other than, trailing John Moog. All right, Luke and I are going to talk some baseball, some football. I'm going to talk some crab cakes before the week is over. If you missed any of the conversations, the conversations have been just amazing. I didn't do a piece with Donna Edwards, but she's going to be coming on. Some of the guests that I've had a crab cake with but haven't sat and talked to, they will be coming on next month. But in the meantime, enjoy the Ocean City stuff. Heather Mazier over in Chestertown with a wonderful conversation about the future of the state. Also, Rick Meehan, the mayor of Ocean City, joined us. The mayor of Salisbury, Jake Day, who was just a great guy and a delicious Fratelli's Baltimore crab cake. We've been having lots and lots of serendipity in the first week of this thing. So I hope we keep the mojo going this week. Maybe some James Taylor, maybe some Jimmy Buffett. We mixed in some Bruno Mars. We got some music. We got some masks. I'm Nestor. He's Luke. We are WNST AM 1570. Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking. Baltimore, positive.